The morning light crept gently through the thin curtains, touching the quiet room with a softness that felt almost deliberate, as if the day itself was approaching with care. She sat on the edge of her bed, feet resting on the cool floor, hands clasped together so tightly that her fingers ached. Sleep had barely visited her that night. Her mind had been crowded with thoughts she could not silence, unpaid bills, broken relationships, unanswered prayers, and the heavy fear that tomorrow might look exactly like yesterday. The world outside was waking up, but inside her heart, everything felt still, uncertain, and painfully fragile. In that silence, she felt small, as though her problems were far too big for her strength and her faith far too weak to carry them. She closed her eyes, not because she felt strong enough to pray, but because she did not know what else to do. Words refused to come easily. There was no long, perfect prayer waiting on her lips, only a deep sigh that escaped her chest. It was the kind of sigh that carries exhaustion, disappointment, and a quiet plea for help all at once. She had prayed before, many times, but today felt different. Today, she was not asking for miracles with confidence. She was simply reaching out because she had nothing left to hold on to. In that moment, her heart whispered what her lips could barely form: God, I need you. As she sat there, the sounds of morning slowly filled the air. A distant bird sang, the hum of life beginning somewhere beyond her window. She remembered how many mornings she had started like this before, weighed down by the same fears, wondering if God truly heard her or if her prayers were disappearing into the quiet ceiling above. Doubt tried to creep in, reminding her of all the times she had waited and seen no change. Yet, beneath that doubt, there was something else, small, gentle, but persistent. It was the memory of who God had been to her before, even when she had not noticed at the time. Her breathing began to slow as she focused not on her problems, but on the simple act of being alive in that moment. Each breath felt like a gift she had not earned, a reminder that she was still here, still held by grace. The weight on her chest did not disappear instantly, but it shifted, just enough for her to feel that she was not alone. She thought about the stories she had heard since childhood, about a God who made the impossible possible, who opened seas, healed the sick, and lifted the broken. For a long time, those stories had felt distant, meant for another time or for people with stronger faith. That morning, she wondered quietly if those same promises could still reach someone like her. Her hands loosened slightly, resting open on her lap. It felt like a small surrender, an unspoken confession that she could not fix everything by herself. The room did not change, and her circumstances did not suddenly improve, but something within her began to soften. The fear that had been shouting in her mind grew quieter, replaced by a gentle reassurance that she could not explain with logic. It was not a loud voice or a dramatic sign, but a calm awareness that God was present in that ordinary, fragile moment. She remembered a simple truth she had heard many times but rarely believed: when life became hard, nothing is impossible with God. Those words echoed in her heart, not as a command, but as an invitation to trust. She realized that faith was not about having all the answers or feeling brave every morning. Sometimes, faith was simply choosing to believe that God was working, even when the evidence was not yet visible. That realization brought tears to her eyes, not tears of despair this time, but tears of release. As the sunlight grew brighter, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by fear. She did not picture everything being perfect. She knew life did not work that way. Instead, she imagined walking through her struggles with God beside her, giving her strength for each step rather than removing every obstacle. The thought brought a quiet comfort, like a hand resting gently on her shoulder. She understood that God's presence did not always change situations instantly, but it always changed the person who trusted Him. Her prayer slowly became less about asking and more about resting. She thanked God for the morning, for the breath in her lungs, for the chance to begin again. Gratitude felt strange at first, almost undeserved, but as she named even the smallest blessings, her heart grew lighter. She realized how often she had measured God's faithfulness by visible results, forgetting that His greatest work often happens deep within the soul. That morning, she sensed that something unseen but powerful was taking place inside her. The fears did not vanish completely. Thoughts of uncertainty still lingered at the edges of her mind, waiting for a moment to return. But now, they no longer held the same power. She felt anchored by a quiet confidence that God was bigger than her worries, stronger than her doubts, and closer than she had ever imagined. The impossible no longer felt like a final verdict, it felt like a space where God could move in ways she did not yet understand. She opened her eyes and looked around the room again. Everything looked the same, yet she felt different. The day ahead was still unknown, filled with challenges she could not predict, but her heart was steadier. She rose slowly, carrying with her the peace she had found in that simple, honest prayer. The morning had not erased her problems, but it had reminded her of something far more important, that with God, even the heaviest burdens could be carried, and even the most impossible situations could become places of hope. As she stepped into the day, she held on to that truth like a quiet promise, letting it guide her thoughts and calm her spirit. She did not need all the answers right now. It was enough to know that God was with her, walking into the unknown alongside her. And in the gentle assurance, she found the strength to believe, once again, that nothing is impossible with God. As the day unfolded, she stepped outside, feeling the air brush against her face like a quiet reminder that life was still moving forward. The sky stretched wide above her, painted in soft shades of blue, and for the first time in a long while, she noticed its beauty. Normally, her mind would have been racing, replaying worries and imagining worst-case scenarios, but now her thoughts felt slower, more intentional. She walked with a gentle awareness that each step, no matter how small, was part of a journey God was guiding. She did not know where the road would lead, but she sensed she was not walking it alone. Moments that once felt ordinary began to carry meaning. The smile of a stranger, the warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of her own footsteps, all of it felt like quiet signs of grace. She remembered how often she had rushed through her days, consumed by anxiety, barely noticing the blessings woven into the ordinary. Now, her heart was more open, more attentive. It felt as though God was teaching her to see again, not just with her eyes, but with faith. She realized that miracles are not always sudden transformations. Sometimes they are gentle shifts in perspective that slowly change everything. As responsibilities demanded her attention, she felt a familiar sense of pressure trying to return. Tasks waited to be completed, decisions needed to be made, and uncertainty still hovered in the background. Yet instead of panicking, she paused. In that pause, she whispered another prayer, not out of desperation, but out of trust. She asked for wisdom, for patience, for strength to face whatever came next. The words flowed more easily now, carried by a quiet confidence that God was listening. That simple act of turning her heart toward Him brought a steady calm she had not known before. Challenges did not disappear as the hours passed. There were moments when doubt crept back in, whispering that nothing had truly changed, that her problems were still too big. She felt her chest tighten, the old fear knocking at the door of her mind. But this time, she did not let it take control. She remembered the peace she had felt that morning and held onto it like a shield. She reminded herself that faith was not the absence of fear, but the decision to trust God even when fear was present. She thought about how many times in the past she had tried to carry everything on her own, believing that strength meant never admitting weakness. Now, she understood that true strength came from surrender. Admitting her limits did not make her weak, it made room for God's power to work in her life. This realization felt freeing, like setting down a heavy burden she had carried for far too long. She no longer needed to prove anything. She only needed to trust. As the afternoon light softened, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. There had been losses she never expected, prayers she thought had gone unanswered, and seasons of waiting that tested her faith. At times, she had wondered if God had forgotten her. Looking back now, she began to see those moments differently. Even in the silence, God had been shaping her heart, teaching her endurance, and preparing her for a deeper trust. What once felt like abandonment now appeared as a season of quiet growth. She realized that God's timing rarely matches human expectations. She had wanted immediate answers, quick solutions, and clear signs. God, however, was offering something more lasting, a faith that could stand firm even when circumstances did not change right away. That kind of faith was not built overnight. It was formed slowly, through moments of doubt, honest prayers, and small choices to believe. Understanding this gave her patience, not just with God's plan, but with herself as well. As evening approached, she felt tired, but it was a different kind of tiredness. It was not the exhaustion of despair, but the weariness that comes from a full day of effort and reflection. She welcomed the quiet of the coming night, grateful for the strength she had been given to make it through the day. Once again, she turned her thoughts toward God, offering thanks not only for the good moments, but even for the challenges that had pushed her to rely on Him more deeply. She began to understand that faith does not guarantee an easy life. It does not promise that every door will open or that every dream will be fulfilled exactly as imagined. What it does promise is God's presence, steady, faithful, and unchanging. That presence was enough. Knowing that God walked with her through uncertainty gave her courage to face tomorrow without dread. She no longer needed to see the entire path ahead. Trusting God for the next step was enough. In the quiet of the night, she reflected on the meaning of the words she had held on to all day: nothing is impossible with God. She realized that impossibility is often a human conclusion, based on limited understanding and fear. God's view is far greater, not bound by time, circumstances, or human weakness. What seemed impossible to her was simply an opportunity for God to reveal His power and love in unexpected ways. This truth settled deep within her, becoming a foundation she could stand on. Her heart softened as she thought about others who might be walking through their own impossible situations. She felt a growing compassion, a desire to encourage and uplift those who felt lost and overwhelmed. Perhaps her journey, with all its struggles and doubts, could become a source of hope for someone else. The thought gave her a new sense of purpose. She understood that God often uses our hardest moments to shape us into vessels of comfort and strength for others. As she prepared for rest, she felt a quiet joy that did not depend on circumstances. It was the joy of knowing she was loved, seen, and cared for by a God who never fails. She released her worries one by one, trusting that God would continue the work He had begun in her life. Sleep came more easily than it had in a long time, carried by the peace of surrender. The next morning would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new mercies. She knew there would be moments when fear tried to return, when faith felt fragile once again. Yet she also knew where to turn. Prayer was no longer just a last resort, it had become a place of refuge, a daily conversation with a God who listens. With each new day, her trust would grow stronger, shaped by experience and sustained by grace. She learned that believing nothing is impossible with God does not mean expecting constant miracles. It means trusting God's heart, even when His hands seem still. It means choosing hope over despair, faith over fear, and surrender over control. This belief transformed not just how she prayed, but how she lived. Every step, every decision, every breath became an opportunity to trust God more deeply. In that quiet confidence, she found freedom. Freedom from the need to have everything figured out. Freedom from the weight of impossible expectations. Freedom to live each day knowing that no matter what she faced, God's power was greater. Her story was still unfolding, and there were chapters yet to be written. But she no longer feared what lay ahead. With a peaceful heart, she rested in the truth that had carried her through the day and would continue to guide her tomorrow. The impossible no longer defined her limits. Instead, it became a reminder of God's limitless power and unending love. And in that assurance, she walked forward with hope, trusting completely that with God, nothing is impossible.